video. First one was for Tumblr sort of in general. I was going to post it and just throw it up under my coffee tag, and it kind of sucked. It wouldn't have been fun to watch, and I didn't want to burden anybody with my voice as a part of that thing, so I just didn't do it. I've tried a couple times to direct something at you specifically, and they've all ended up going off on a tangent somewhere, or I get interrupted or something like that. So hopefully this is the cut that makes it, because I got stuff to do, like drink this coffee. I'd like to have lunch, etc. So I'm gonna push for it. I'll have sent you the length when I send you the list. Probably I'm shooting for somewhere like 25-ish minutes. That's about what I've landed on when I've done this kind of thing before. So yeah, let's do it. Three basic things I want to talk about. The first thing is a set of general brewing considerations that took me a while to learn from people who knew more than I did, and I wish I'd learned earlier. They'll apply equally to coffee and tea, or I guess to like adult beverages, if that's a thing that your brain works at all. Not mine, that's above my pay grade, but we'll talk about things that you should keep in mind when you're brewing. The second part then will be the other stuff, the like material stuff, not abstract considerations. I'll talk about my setup and why I don't think that you should emulate it if you're trying to sort of get into coffee. I have other recommendations, cheaper recommendations, simpler, lower impact stuff. So we'll talk about those. Not that I'm going to be like hawking gear at you the whole time. My intention is to, all in all, recommend stuff with a price tag of no more than like $35 combined. So we'll do that as part of the second thing. And then third, I'll have brewed this coffee probably during the second part. We'll try the coffee. It's coffee I've already posted about, but I'm going to drink the coffee anyway, and I'll have made it on camera, so I might as well close that loop. All right, first part, then, brewing stuff. First, always first, is grinding. Use freshly ground coffee. If you've got people in your life that are buying Onyx, they're probably using freshly ground coffee. That's a good thing. The tea corollary to this would be whole leaf tea, like good quality tea. Not necessarily like, all the fancy, spring harvest, pure tippy grade, whatever. That's not the point. The point is, at least for a person like me, where my brain is crippled for life by sort of biology student considerations about surface area to volume ratio, the stuff goes bad slower, it stays fresh longer, it tastes better, it smells great. Grinding it fresh is just the right way to do it. If you can, use fresh coffee as well. Everything tastes better within like the first 3 weeks after roasting. This stuff was roasted on the 18th, I believe. It's fresh coffee. Now that's not as big a deal, and tea stays good for way longer than that, but my point is, it's sort of as fresh as reasonably possible. That's not a thing I go out of my way to spend extra money on. In fact, I drink coffee quite slowly here at home. Bags will often be a month or older, but it's a thing. The main thing is I'm grinding fresh. Just do it, even if it's a shitty grinder. The worst grinder in the world with decent coffee is better than pre-ground all of the time. All of the time. But maybe more foundational, definitely more foundational actually, and maybe a little more subtle, is water. Now, I'm going to go ahead and grind this while I'm thinking about it, otherwise I will forget. Come on. There you go. Little shits. Noise for 1 second. While this is doing its thing, I'm going to go grab a filter and decide how I'm going to talk about water. Okay, water, right? it's not neutral. It can't be, you know, it's an ingredient. So, if it's not neutral, then it has qualities. And if we're interested in the quality of the final product, we should be thinking about the qualities of the ingredients. Now, water has lots of properties. Of course, when I say water here, I'm referring to the solvent that you're brewing with, whether that be like city tap water or filtered water, or whatever, which are different things. They taste different. They've got different pHs and levels of mineralization, alkalinities, and all that stuff. For oxygenation. Those are all wildly nuanced, way above the pay grade of this video, but they matter. How do they matter specifically? Well, I'm not so interested in that for the purposes of this video. What I am interested in talking about, and this is a thing I'll come back to a lot, is consistency. As long as you're brewing with the same water every time, or as close to the same water as possible, and that water is tasty on its own, you've got a really good chance of not bottlenecking your brew. You're never gonna go, oh, weird, that bloomed differently this time, or, oh, this has kind of a weird chalky taste. It's just never gonna happen. You know what the water is like, you know how it behaves with your coffee, and you know how it tastes, so you're actually gonna be able to distinguish between the flavors of the thing that you're drinking instead of the water. Never gonna get blindsided, and that is so critical. It's happened to me so many times. Now, here at my apartment, the tap water sucks moose dick. It's inconsistent. Sometimes it's chlorine, sometimes it's not. That's kind of whatever to me. I'm happy to drink it on its own. I cook with it, it's fine. But for the purposes of my good coffee and my good tea, I use filtered water. A lot of the time, I use just like whatever the cheapest, generic version of a Brita is that I have in my fridge. But right now, I'm trying to blow through a bunch of water that I had saved up from the snowstorm a while back. So this is like store-bought bottled water. Don't do that if you can avoid it. If it's already a thing that you do, that's fine. But don't go out and buy more water in a bottle for coffee. That would be weird of you. Don't do it. Okay, so freshly ground stuff. We got our water. The question is, how do we know how much of those things to use? And there are a couple answers. One answer might be, just use what looks like the right amount. To which I respond, fuck you. No, we can do better than that. Second answer, is potentially volumetric. You use, a tablespoon, and you pour up to like a certain line in your brewer. And my answer to that is, you got the spirit, but we can still do better than that. And without any extra hassle, really. Not much anyway. So the amount of coffee that I ground through here is 20 grams. Now, this is what I've worked out to be the right amount for me to have an enjoyable amount of coffee. Now, how much water do I use? To get that answer, I use a ratio, just like lots of other people. This is a thing that was originally set forth as an espresso brewing principle, but is now generalized to through the pour over world into the rest of coffee, even drip brewer coffee. Mass ratios are beautiful, beautiful things. They completely circumvent all of the problems you can have with beans being different altitudes, different varieties, whatever, different densities, importantly. They ignore potential variances in your water. They ignore air voids. They ignore all that shit. It's just the mass of the coffee. A cheap kitchen scale will cost you $3 or $4. You can get nice ones that have timers and everything for pour over, which, why would you, don't spend $60 on that. You have a timer on your phone. I almost just knocked my brewer off the counter there. I hope you didn't see that. I'm glad I didn't call attention to it or anything. But we use mass ratios. They vary depending on how you're brewing. I'm using 60 grams per liter here for my pour over. So I've got 20 grams of coffee. So I'll be using, 20 divided by 60 times the liter. So I'll be using 333 grams of water. Thank goodness for the metric system. It's beautiful. We love it. Right. So I've got my ratio. If I were doing French press, I would use a different ratio. That's a different kind of brewing. That's infusion brewing versus percolation. So I'd be using around about 75 grams per liter, so more coffee than this, but I'm not worried about it right now. We're just doing this. My point is, insofar as I have one, I've rambled for almost 11 minutes already. Ratios are key. That's another layer of bedrock in consistency. You've always got the same amount of coffee, you've always got the same water. Anything on top of that is going to be variation in how you brew, and we can make that more consistent. And so then the only variation is essentially the coffee itself, which is where we want to be. Same thing applies to tea, of course. Cool. So I think, we talked about water, talked about grinding, talked about ratio being mass. I've made sure to say that applies to tea as well, so you don't forget. Cool. So we can brew-ish. I'm gonna put the water on. I happen to own a lab grade wash bottle, which is what I use to pre-wet my filters. But it just makes me feel like a fancy bitch. I didn't buy that for coffee, I assure you. I bought it for probably less good reasons. Okay, I guess as an addendum to part one, pre-wet your filters. You can imagine taking the filter and putting it in a cup of water for a couple minutes and not having a taste. It's like paper tea. Filters aren't neutral either, so go ahead and rinse those shits. Just do it. It's worth your time. It sticks it to the brewer. It makes it easier to clean up. It's a whole deal. But also, pre-rinse your teas. If you're brewing in an infuser, that's super easy. You just run some water over the tea for a couple seconds. If you're brewing in a Gaiwan, which we'll come back to, give it a little rinse. It's the easiest thing in the world. It rinses off all the dust and shit from shipping. It's just a good idea. Okay, so coffee into pre-wet filter. This is part 2 now, obviously. Now, I guess I have to start talking about what I'm doing and why. Which is kind of an annoyance, I admit, because of my setup. So, you saw my kettle. It's an electric kettle. It's a pouring kettle. It's got that gooseneck stem spout, I guess. I like this kettle. I do not think you should buy a new kettle. If you have a stovetop kettle, use that. If you have a normal electric kettle with a normal spout, use that. If you have a gooseneck kettle, cool, I guess. It pours nicely. I enjoy it. But don't get caught up on people making kettle recommendations. It's just some hot fucking water. You can do it out of a pot if you wanted to. Ignore the grinder. This is like the most expensive appliance that I own. I have my gripes with it. I happen to quite like it. I don't know if I would recommend it. So we're not going to do that. I'm using here I think they call it a 3-cup Chemex. I would call it a 1-cup Chemex because the capacity is not that high. I don't recommend necessarily that you buy a Chemex. If you want to make pour over coffee and you really like the look of a Chemex, cool, get a Chemex. However, you can get an alternative to a Chemex that is easier to clean, more widely available, much cheaper, importantly, and I think easier to brew with for less than half the price. It's a Hario V60. It is whiter. You can just set it on top of a mug. The filters are easier to find and less wasteful. I like a Hario V60. You can get a cheapo plastic Hario V60 and 100 filters for under 20 bucks. And if you decide that you just want to try pour over coffee, Hario V60 is the way to go all the way. Always my recommendation. We can have conversations about other brewers on top of that, if, 10 years from now or whatever, you decide you want to have that conversation. But just note that I'm not like a huge Chemex fan. This is the first thing I bought when I got into coffee, and I still have it. You'll have noticed I dropped a chopstick down the spout here. That's because on this particular model, the filter likes to collapse into the spout and prevent air from getting back through. It's a whole deal. So that's what that was. Okay, got my brewer, got my scale, got my water hot. I'm actually gonna retouch that so it's as close to boiling as possible. The only thing that may surprise you here, that's not just me pouring water on top of coffee, is I'm gonna pour about 2 to 3 times the mass of coffee I have in water and stir it and let it sit for a minute. That's just to let some of the byproducts from roasting dissolve out, specifically carbon dioxide. You can't see it right now, but coffee is sort of bubbling. Not sort of bubbling, it's a whole ass fire swamp thing going on. Just because the coffee's fresh, the carbon dioxide trapped in the grounds is being dissolved into the water, and air is dissolving that. And we're gonna let that sit for a minute, 45 seconds actually, ish, so that the carbon dioxide gets out of the way, and when I do the actual pour, just like your kitchen coffee machine would do, there's no carbon dioxide in the way. There's as much water to coffee contact as possible. Plus it's all pre-wet, so the flow is gonna be better. Yeah. I think that's all I have to say about the brewer. I've said my piece about the kettle. I've said my piece about the scale. I've said that a cheap grinder is better than no grinder and to ignore the grinder that I have. An aside here about extraction theory, which is its own thing. It's a legit bona fide area of study in, I think originally kind of analytical chemistry, but it's its own coffee thing now. It's sort of a food science niche. We can talk a lot about it. We won't. What we will talk about is a thing I think is neat. There's the knowledge that coffee beans are not all coffee, right? You could put coffee beans in water for 1,000,000 years and not all of it would dissolve, of course. Because why would that work? It wouldn't. Now, coffee beans are about 70% cellulose. That's the insoluble shit. Mostly wood, is what I'm saying. 30% though is soluble. And that's interesting because we don't want all of it. You can imagine grinding coffee, putting it in a French press, and letting that sit for 1,000,000 years. And the coffee you would get after that, aside from being 1,000,000 years stale, would taste really bitter. You wouldn't get any sweetness out of it. It would be really dry and, for lack of a better word, extracty. Which is an extreme example to illustrate the fact that we don't actually want to extract all 30% of the solubles, the sort of remainder from the cellulose. Well, we want to extract some of it, otherwise we just have water. So where's the middle ground? Where's the sort of ideal extraction? Come on, scale. There we go. Consequences of cheap equipment. Buttons suck. Well, it turns out that roughly, this is complicated and very contentious, but roughly the ideal extraction is at about 20 or 21%. We want about 20% of the stuff that makes up the coffee bean end up in our cup. Now, what constitutes that 20%, sort of which units of 30% we actually get, is a whole different conversation. It comes down partly to water, like I talked about earlier, but it comes down to temperature and flow and grind size and all this other stuff. We can throw that aside for a second and just realize that if we're getting 20% of what's in the coffee, and we're measuring by mass, which we are, then 20% of the mass of the coffee beans should be washed away into the cup, which is kind of fun, I think, to think about. If you took this filter and you somehow got all of the coffee out of it, you scraped all the coffee out onto a tray, and you dehydrated that in the oven, which is a fun experiment you can do, by the way, at home, it should weigh less than when you brewed with it. 20% less, really, aside from methodological errors. Which means the water should have that 20% in it. Sure enough, if all of the water that got absorbed by the ground ended up in the cup, if you measured all the water in the system, that solution that we call coffee is now heavier by 20% of the mass of the grounds. So I poured in 333 milliliters of water. I dosed in 20 grams of coffee. 20% of 20, is it's gonna be 4 grams. So including the stuff that got absorbed by the filter and whatever, including the stuff that was lost there should be 337 grams of coffee in the system. I think that's kind of fun. And that's a much more dramatic result in something like espresso, where our ratio is so much higher. Here, we're brewing with 60 grams per liter, whereas with espresso, we're brewing with I have to like invert the ratio in my head. It's a whole deal. My point is, in espresso, you're brewing with like, it would be the equivalent of making like 40 grams of this stuff. Much, much, much stronger. That extraction percentage, though, is the same. So the sort of mass of the espresso that's not water is way higher, which I think is kind of fun. Okay, so I brewed my coffee. It smells really nice. It's way too hot to drink, so I'm going to pour it out. This is just a it's a chipped latte glass from work, which we tend to walk away with because we can't serve in them. I'm using it here because of the next thing I'm going to show you. If you're tasting a lot of stuff side by side, especially with other people, you don't want to all be drinking out of the same vessel, because that's kind of unsanitary. So the answer is a spoon. You may have seen this in, I don't know, YouTube or whatever. You've probably seen people cupping beverages. We cup occasionally at work. It's not really a thing, but people like to have cupping spoons. It makes you feel fancy. And cupping works best out of a shallow vessel, so that's what I've got here, is this latte cup. Totally unnecessary, but kind of fun, is this boy. This is a cupping spoon from an artist by the name of Umeko Moriyoshi. Umeko is super cool. They're a coffee professional, coffee writer, really, who I have a lot of respect for. Umeko runs a podcast that I've, full disclosure, never listened to, about coffee sustainability and diversity in the coffee industry. But big focal point for queer coffee people. Obviously, an underrepresented demographic, and I don't say this to say you should go out and buy a cupping spoon from Umeko, which, if you want a rainbow cupping spoon, you could. Flexible pricing scale on their Etsy. I think I paid like $6 for this. And as a gift, I got all of these black ones. This is from a friend, not from Umeko. I've not really talked to them ever. Got these black ones, which I love because black is a thing. But also one of the bigger rainbow one. Just absolutely gorgeous. Love it. The reason I bring up Umeko and this cupping spoon is not to make you go buy them, but rather to say that Umeko has some resources on their website, I think also on their Instagram. I'm not on Instagram, but I'm told it's there, of a list of mutual aids and charities and stuff in the specialty coffee and beverage industry that might be worth going to check out, just to read a little bit about if you're interested in those kinds of things. Cool stuff. I would be remiss if I didn't plug Umeko. So, talked about V60. I've talked about cheap-ass, very pretty rainbow or black cupping spoons in different sizes. I've not talked about tea kit yet, and that's because That shit's real simple. Way simpler than coffee. Tea is so much easier to brew. You need a kettle, ideally a thermometer, especially if you're going to be brewing more delicate teas like white and green that you can burn at too high temperatures. With those things, it's great to have a gaiwan. I really cannot recommend enough that you get the cheapest gaiwan you can possibly find, with one stipulation. I paid, I think, $6 for this set on eBay. Now, it's super small. It's like 150 mils, I think. Enough for 2 demi-tasses, basically. It'll make 2 servings per steep. But the advantage of gaiwan is that you can very easily re-steep. Some of my oolongs, I can get up to 10 steeps. So, a very modest amount of coffee, maybe 4 or 5 grams tops, and I can steep 10 times with that. So the legs are much longer on tea in a gaiwan than on coffee, of course, which is why when we were first talking, I said that those bags of, like, what is it, 100 grams a piece, whatever Yunnan Sourcing sells those bags at, can last a really long time. Gaiwans are cheap. They give you a ton of control over your brewing. If you buy one with white on the inside, which you should, you'll be able to see what's going on a lot better than in an infuser, which is really nice. It's nice to see the leaves open up. It's really cool to be able to see the differences in, buds versus older leaves versus, how they're rolled, silver needle versus like bilo chun. That's fun. That's the reason I take the pictures I do when I do those tea posts. You can get much bigger gaiwans if you want to be drinking more tea per sitting or like per cup, or if you want to be brewing for multiple people. Let me actually put this back where it goes. Gaiwans are cheap. The places you will be referencing, like Yunnan Sourcing or maybe Red Blossom Tea, are very often going to be brewing in a gaiwan, so that's how their instructions are going to be listed. And very importantly to me, they're easier to clean than like a basket or one of those ball type infusers. So much easier. There's no waste. It's a whole deal. It's nice. I really like a gaiwan. They're a little, they can be a little tricky at first to learn how to pour out of, to like tilt the lid to capture everything, but cannot recommend enough. Plus, again, like the spoon, like the wash bottle, it makes you feel fancy. And, for something as cheap and as durable and as practical as that, how are you gonna argue? Anyway, I've got the cupping spoon out. I might as well actually, cup. Let's see, Papua New Guinea, this was 1,800 to 2,200 meters? So, pretty distinct edges on the notes. That's mostly a function of altitude. Cold nights makes things grow slowly. Dense beans. Yeah, toffee, caramel sweetness, with a grapefruit, tiny twinge of bitterness. I really like this coffee. I'm going to regret drinking it out of a latte cup because it feels weird to me to not be drinking a steamed milk drink out of these, because that's what my muscle memory says. But yeah, that's super nice. I think this would be killer with some, vanilla bean ice cream with this stuff would just slay. I tend to like more floral fruity notes, and this is kind of right on the edge of that, where my brain is like, oh, it's a floral fruity coffee, and then the toffee is like, no bitch, it's confectionery, which that's a tramp stamp for you. Or I guess for me, though, to be honest, I'm running out of room down there. All right, I think that's everything. 29 minutes. I'll end it before 30. Yeah. Thank you, if you've made it this far, for listening to me for this long. I hope this was interesting. I hope you don't have... Actually, no. I hope you do have questions, because then I get to talk to you more. And I don't know enough about you to talk to you about other stuff. So, this is just me shamelessly talking about shit I'm into to try and engage. So, that's where we're at. Okay, 29:51. For my own sake, I'm going to end it here. Goodbye. Thank you for listening. I'm under 30 minutes. Thank goodness.